welcome everyone. And this is the first in a series of events that the South African BDS coalition has organized. But this is a special part of our school, our Solidarity School, that will have regular programs. And the idea of the school is to create a space for sharing, for learning, and for debating some of the key and critical and sometimes controversial issues that confront us in the Palestinian solidarity movement. So I'd like to welcome all of you today. I'd like to welcome the participants, a special welcome to the speakers. And I think it's going to be quite an important debate, quite an important conversation that we are going to have today. Some of the rules would be that we would allow each of the speakers, we have 4 presenters today, they'll each be allowed 15 minutes. You can, of course, use the chat to list your questions or your comments, etc. And after that, we'll open the floor, as it were, for questions, for comments, and for engaging with the presenters as well as with each other. I think the methodology that we've used for this school is that we've circulated articles so that you, whoever joined as a participant, the school could familiarize yourself with some of the debates and some of the thinking of the Palestinian, the BDS movement, the coalition here. So again, a very big welcome. I think there's this issue today, the theme of the school today is Christianity, Palestine, and solidarity. In the last couple of months, the last couple of weeks, this has been a key issue in our media, and it's been an issue in our debates for a while, partly because it's always been an issue of how the church responds to Palestine. And particularly in the last decade or so, we've seen a rise of controversial positions in the church in relation to Palestine. I don't want to enter into the conversation now. I think we have 4 very good presenters who's going to deal with the topic. The first speaker for the afternoon is Rifat Kassisi. Is the founder, member, director of Kairos Palestine. He's going to kickstart, and I think he's going to give an historical overview of the position of Christians in Palestine and talk to the issue. A great welcome to you. It's really good to have you with us today. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Actually, I tried my best to follow the points which were sent to me to try to formulate my presentation. I would start by maybe giving some points about what we are experiencing right now and where we are now as Palestinians. I think my first point that we are really facing an intensification of Israeli expansionism, colonialism, and apartheid to an unprecedented situation. I mean, Israeli settlers have created a reign of terror in the West Bank, definitely with the help of the Israeli army. And just to give you an example about some statistics, which, I mean, usually I don't like to start with statistics, but it's important to mention that till end August, we have around 30 Palestinians who were killed. Many of them, they were just civilians, were in the wrong place at the wrong time. More than 2,000 people were also demolished. More than 500 structures were demolished, leaving more than or around 700 people displaced. I'm just trying to mention that Israel is also exploiting the COVID-19 to implement its policies of isolating more and more the Palestinians. But my second point is this trial to reconstruct the Middle East and to isolate the Palestinians even further. Israel-Palestine is forgotten today as a conflict of international importance. Israeli occupation and apartheid, as if it's becoming like a domestic security issue for Israel. Palestinian human rights violation is no longer hinders Israel from gaining new international alliances. And as we've seen lately, the normalization with some Arab countries. And this reconstruction of the Middle East is to replace Iran, Syria, Hezbollah as the major threat to the region, not the Israeli occupation. And this normalization between the Arab countries and Israel is definitely much more than just a peace treaty between, these countries who, they've never been really in war with Israel, but it's more about trade, more about fighting Iran, and also financing the coming war, if there will be war with Iran, and Israel needs to be part of this war, and without having relations with the Arab countries, it will be difficult for Israel to interfere in any war, just like the war on Iraq 2003. The third point today that we see that there is again an intensification of blaming the victims and the criminalization of the resistance, the Palestinian resistance, and also our friends and partners. When explaining the reasons for all this, we usually put the blame on the Palestinian division, Palestinian terrorism, failures of Palestinian leadership, poor Palestinian governance and corruption, etc. But we fail to see the main root cause for all this, and we find the Palestinians as the easy target to continue blaming them for all the misery they are facing, and also the oppression they are living under. But on the other side, and this is again my pain point, that there is an opportunity. And there is opportunity arising as we can see it here internally. We started to see more unity among Palestinians. And here I do not just refer to the meeting which was conducted, I think last week, between the Secretary Generals of the Palestinian factions and the Palestinian PLO leadership, but I can see it also on the ground, more people, more youth movements, and also more international solidarity. And here I can talk about Kairos Palestine and also the global Kairos for Justice movement. As you know, I am a Palestinian Christian, and you know, the presence of Christians in Palestine is not really well known worldwide. And those who know anything about Palestine and Palestinian Christians will immediately think of our shrinking population. Definitely, we are a shrinking population. We have around 50,000 Christians living in the occupied territory. And we have around 160,000 living in Israel. But the presence of the Christian community is strong. It's dynamic and vibrant for many reasons. Our presence is continued in the country as old as Christianity itself, born more than 2,000 years ago. Christians also are a crucial part of Palestinian society and of the Arab and Muslim world in general, and are afflicted by the occupation and discrimination like everyone. Maybe the biggest threat, which is, I mean, facing the whole Palestinians, but the Christians in particular, because we are little in number, which is the de facto geographic division and isolation. And here, I should say that we have never, ever experienced such fragmentation in such a violent, drastic way. We are spread out across the West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, Israel, refugees in Jordan, refugees in Syria and Lebanon, refugees in other Arab countries, and in the diaspora. And this, I mean, this forbid us from feeling this unity, which is very important for us to continue feeling that we are one nation and one people. And of course, the occupation has worked so hard to divide us, to render us unreachable to each other, to break our sense of connection and shared struggles. This is perhaps the most painful challenge of all. In December 2009, a group of Palestinian Christians leaders launched the document, and we called it a moment of truth, a word of faith, hope, and love from the heart of Palestinian suffering. This document, which is known widely as Kairos Palestine document, gives voice to Palestinian Christians, and we consider it as this is our word to the world about the reality of Israeli occupation and apartheid. And it is a call for support in establishing peace and equality, peace with justice and equality in our region. The Kairos document addresses itself first to ourselves, definitely. We tell our people to be patient, but also to not to sit observing the things on what's going around us. We need also to take part of it. And that's why we said resistance is an obligation, is a right and obligation for Christians. But the document also addresses itself to those churches, I mean worldwide, whose theology justifies the occupation and does not include the Palestinian Christians, and challenge the widespread belief that the conflict is fundamentally between Muslims and Jews. So although it is a theological document, theopolitical document, and we are not trying to present it as a Christian as such, but this is to break the stereotypes about this conflict, that this is between Muslims and Jews. And I think this is something we found it very important. Kairos Palestine also believes that we must protest the constructions of all facts on the ground. You know, the settlements, the wall, the stealing of our resources, the movement restrictions. We focus that we need to protest and also to fight all these constructions on the ground. Also, we call for acknowledging the difference between violence and terrorism, as they are not the same, definitely. And most of the time, our resistance is labeled as terrorism. And today, even our clergy and now they are labeled as theological terrorists. So even they introduce terrorism to such words as theology. Also, Kairos Palestine asserts that human rights cannot be divided or selectively applied. Rights are rights. Also, we urge churches and other communities around the world to join the BDS movement, to raise awareness on its philosophy and methods, and launch specific boycott campaigns. And here, at a time when bloodshed has been a primary strategy, diplomatic negotiations result in frustration and humiliation, and the international community has remained highly passive. We feel that BDS is an effective, peaceful tool that strengthens and unites Israeli, Palestinians, and international peacemakers in one aim to bring about justice and peace into this region. Kairos Palestine also rejects the appropriation of the Bible and its messages as instruments of political gain or geographic monopolization. And here, I mean, yes, it is part of the intellectual and theological resistance. I mean, if theologians around the table allow me to say intellectual and theological resistance as such. And we say all the time that promised land, chosen people, I mean, all these concepts, they might be like intellectual exercises for others, but for us Palestinians, this is a matter of life and death. When people, I mean, analyze these concepts, they are analyzing my presence and the future of my children and my grandchildren. In addition to this, I mean, Kairos Palestine calls on global church and all other communities of conscience to remember that the only genuine peace is peace with justice and not just shallow diplomacy here and there. So we are asking churches to take a solid role in this conflict. So the moment we started Kairos Palestine, immediately when we issued Kairos Palestine document, there was a national Kairos movement being formulated, comprising from a diverse range of individuals and communities, young people, adults, men and women, community-based and ecumenical organizations, clergy members as well, and this movement working in direct cooperation with other Christian organizations and churches inside and also outside. And the second issue that we have also created an international Kairos for global justice movement. And today, I mean, Karen will be speaking about the call which we just issued, a cry for hope, and she will speak in more depth about this call. In Palestine today, we really have reached the moment of truth, the moment of Kairos. Thus, we must speak the truth. As Kairos, we will move from a reactive to a proactive approach, raising our voices courageously and without cosmetics or fear. We need, I mean, speaking the truth then requires speaking out against what we cannot accept, against anything that prevents justice from being realized. And we said, I mean, recently in the open letter which the National Council of Christian Organizations had issued in 2017, and it was an open letter to the global ecumenical movement, to the World Council of Churches, we told them we don't need any more shallow diplomacy. I mean, today, if the church will not take a strong position, it will just continue whitewashing for the oppression which the Palestinians are living under. And here we said, first and foremost, we can no longer accept the silence of the church, because silence means complicity with the crime. We cannot accept any financial assistance from any church or organization without its commitment to work toward ending the occupation. And here again, I mean, when the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain, they say that we support the Palestinians with money. No, we don't want money. We want your solidarity. We want the occupation to end. We want this oppression to end. We cannot accept any theological or political justifications for the occupation. Unfortunately, till today, we still see theologians speak about justification for this oppression, for this occupation. We cannot accept any argument that tries to convince us that our problems are with Muslims rather than with the occupation. As many of our sisters and brothers from the global north, they try to introduce the issue as if it's a Muslim issue. We cannot accept also the arguments of any church that wants to be balanced in its views. putting the victims and the perpetrators on equal footing. This approach, I mean, leads just to a prolongation of this bloodshed. And our blood and the blood of both peoples. I mean, we are also speaking on behalf of the Israelis. The blood of both peoples will stay in the hands of those who maintain it. We cannot accept also the arguments of anyone who wants us to refrain from advocating for BDS or practicing BDS or any other nonviolent means that could help to end the occupation. We cannot also accept any church still investing in the occupation, whether directly or indirectly. For example, by investing in companies that support the occupation. And we are very grateful and thankful to those churches who really took a decisive decision to divest from these companies and from these structures. And here I refer to many churches in the United States. And finally, we cannot accept any church or Christian-related organization that organize tours to the Holy Land without seeing us. I mean, when we wrote in Kairos, Palestine, come and see, we said it because many people come, but they do not see. They do not see us even. Not they do not see the oppression around us, but they do not see us as well. And that's why we said, I mean, who come there as a pilgrim? If he doesn't see us, this is not kosher. And we will speak out loudly against such initiatives. With these principles in mind, principles that exist to strengthen the foundation of justice and to strengthen the solidarity among those working to achieve it, Global Kairos for Justice was created, and I am very happy that Karen will speak about it. I just want to speak a bit about South Africa. Do I still have some time? I cannot hear it. 2 more minutes? 1 minute?
1 minute. I've been muted. I'm just unmuted now. Please round off if you don't mind. 1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute. Although it's not enough 1 minute for South Africa, but I will try. I will do my.
2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, apartheid Israel is worse than apartheid South Africa. This is everyone who visits there tell us the same. It's even worse what we are experiencing now than how you were experiencing the apartheid South Africa in before 1949. When Mandela said, "We will not be free until the Palestinians are free, and our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians," he was not joking. We did not see him joking. We took it as a very serious issue. And he said it actually when he was the chair of the ANC, but also when he was the president of South Africa. And we see it as something which we will continue asking South Africa and South Africans to honor. On the global stage, South Africa now is elected as member of the United Security Council, United Nations Security Council, and chair of the African Union. And we want South Africa, we want them to champion this. You cannot follow the example of the Arab states. And you need, honestly, you need to be Catholic more than the Pope in this, as you were the ones who knew the meaning of oppression and the meaning of solidarity with the oppressed. You enjoyed this solidarity. South Africa should challenge the way Israel treating the Palestinians on the global level. We Palestinians today find ourselves in a position where we are really outcasted. South Africa should not fail us. We need your solidarity more than any time before, as you once had enjoyed our and the world's solidarity. And thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your last words. And I think this is quite important. I'm pleased you spoke before Reverend Frank CHIKANE, because I think it's also quite an important and strong message to the South African Council of Churches and all of us as South Africans, and particularly the solidarity movement to strengthen its resolve and effort. So thank you for the presentation, and those who have questions, please put it in the chat. I am going to go to the next presenter. It's Reverend Frank CHIKANE. I think I don't have to introduce him to any of us. He's been an activist for a long time, and he's been a strong anti-apartheid activist, brought the church into the movement along with everyone else. So you're very welcome. And I think you have your brief, so please go ahead. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I'm pleased to share this opportunity this time together with the colleagues, so I would not speak about them much. I just want to say the issue about Palestine and the treatment of the people of the Palestine is one of the issues that pains me daily, because I'm as a moderator of the Church's Commission on International Affairs of the World Council, I receive these reports daily. I'm linked, I'm connected. It is painful. And that's why I am still shocked that the world can let what is happening in the Palestine to continue happening. But you know, it reminded me of our experience of the struggle ourselves, that at the height of our struggle, most of the Western countries, except in the Nordic countries, supported the apartheid system. Most of those who were called Christian countries supported the apartheid system. And many of the churches supported the apartheid system, even in South Africa. And it took a huge struggle and the whole anti-apartheid movement internationally to turn things around. And I am convinced that we need a movement internationally, starting from our countries, that will actually launch an equivalent of the anti-apartheid movement that really changed the way in which the world thought. And so I would like to start from there and say, we're doing our best for now. I've worked with the World Council. It's tough because there are churches that still feel guilty about what they did to the Jews in Europe and think that the Palestinians must pay for what they did, which is totally unacceptable. In South Africa, we've got the South African Council of Churches, which is a broad representative council of churches, taking a very clear stand about this matter and calling on the World Council and the Vatican to take a stand that will make sure that all of us campaign to end the occupation in Palestine. I would like to take it further and say the Council of Churches even agreed that churches must consider sanctions against the Israeli state. And many of them have already taken resolutions in that effect. But for now, I've been asked to speak on this theme on Christianity, Palestine, and solidarity. And I thought you should then allow me, because we're dealing with a very difficult situation. In the same way Christians supported apartheid, we have the same situation where Christians support the Israeli state to brutalize Palestinians. And they actually try to reduce it to Israel-Muslim conflict. They don't even know, most of the Christians who take these positions don't even know there are Christians amongst Palestinians. And so I would like to approach this matter in a simplistic way, but direct, and speak to Christians who have got a problem about this matter. The first challenge we have is that Palestine is where Christianity was born. And it should be an advantage, but it is a challenge. It is the birthplace of Jesus Christ. It is, I call it his mission field. I mean, the trips from Galilee to Jerusalem, Bethlehem, it was his field throughout his life. He was crucified there and died in Jerusalem. And Christians then would add that he then ascended into heaven. But I think the critical issue is that when I was there in Palestine, Israel, I chose in 2015 to go and stay in Bethlehem and cross the wall, went across the wall daily. And it was quite interesting to listen to one Christian who said to me, I've been occupied from birth and I'm still occupied up to now. He was 48 years old. And he said, Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem, where I am, and killed across that wall in Jerusalem. And so there is a strong relationship. But part of the problem is that Christians take Palestine as where the faith started. Secondly, is that from there, the faith spread to the rest of the world. And so we now talk about 2.3 billion Christians in the world. And those are the statistics that are given. But people forget that it spread from there. So the Palestinians are the people from where it started. And to use the concept that Christians use, they would say, this was the birth of the Messiah. And this Messiah was there to save the world. I'm using this concept deliberately because they use it, but then they go and turn it around and make it, reduce it to a Palestine-Israel matter and support Israel. And I would like to say that in that concept of the Messiah, it was to save the whole world from its fallen nature. So if you deal with injustices, if you deal with colonization, oppression, racism, that's what Jesus came here for. If that's not the case, then I wouldn't be part of that faith. And I would like to say that he came to break the dividing wall. Go back to that dividing wall. He died to break that wall, the barriers, the partition, the separation, the hostility between the Jews and the Gentiles, and reduce it for now to Jews and Palestinians. But it is in that scripture. And Christians, those Christian Zionists avoid that because they don't even want to talk about it, because it negates their ideology. And I would like to say Christian Zionism is an ideology or theology that rebuilds that wall. That's why they talk about separation, they talk about one side against the other, and they support one side against the other. And then they glorify tribalist concepts, because that's what Jesus came to bring an end to, that there shall be no Jew or Gentile, woman or man, but all of them shall be one. And so they bring back, it's an ideology that negates the very faith. And I would like to use a stronger term to say anyone who supports Christian Zionism is denying the very faith of the followers of Christ. There's no way of explaining it, because it negates everything that Christ died for or Jesus came to die for. And it's a denial of the faith. You can't take sides with Israel against Palestine and not be denying your faith, because Jesus came to die for everybody in the world. It wasn't for Jews alone. It wasn't for Fred CHIKANE's tribe, but it was for everybody. It is justice for all the people of this world. And if the Christian faith is not about this, then it is worshiping idols, because this can't be the God we believe in. God is not a tribalist. And I would like to say, for those Christians who have problems the best way I test any theology, for me, it's whether it is discriminatory. If it supports any form of discrimination, we're discriminated against in South Africa, and I lived through this experience, and they justified it theologically. There was a theology of apartheid to justify this. And so the best test is to say, is your God about justice in the Middle East? If it is not about justice, then it can't be God. If it is about tribes, you know, a God who takes sides with one tribe in Israel, Palestine against another can be God, not a Christian God for that matter. It can be racist. God can be racist. Most people who support this current state of Israel would be the same people who supported racism, colonialism, slavery, and all those ills. And the best test is that it kills. If it kills people, then it is not coming from God, because Jesus is about saving lives. And so we need to be, it's not a difficult thing for me to take a stand on. And I would just want to say that for me, it has never been, I come from a conservative Pentecostal tradition, but it has never been a difficulty for me to dispose of Christian Zionism. I would like to say a few things that make, so that I can keep to my time. That makes Christians an easy prey, and people don't understand this. Because we use what is called Judeo-Christian scriptures. Some Christians then take it as identity with the Jews against the Palestinians. Now, indeed, it's Judeo-Christian because it's based on that history, but it is about justice for all. And I talk about justice for the Jews as much as it should be justice for Palestinians. And the second thing is that Christians become prey because they conflate the Israel of the Bible and the current state of Israel. And so for them, when you talk about Israel, that's the Israel of the Bible. But this created state of Israel is not Israel of the Bible. It is a nationalist state that has been established there, and it must be measured in terms of standards that any state must be measured. And therefore, there's nothing special about it. I know that people talk about, you know, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I always tell them, Jerusalem is a home of diversity and even a diversity of faiths. And when we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we're praying for the peace of the world, because that's where Jesus died there. The next thing, that's a problem. And when we had to take a resolution in South Africa in the SACC earlier this year, people were worried that if we take a stance, if you say you must boycott Israel products, or you must actually apply sanctions against Israel, they say, but what about our holy lands? How are we going to visit the holy lands? And we said, no, you can visit your holy land. I mean, they are holy sites for all of us. That's why the international community wanted to preserve Jerusalem as a place where all people of faith can visit the place. And so people are scared of taking a stand because they think that they will not be able to visit their holy sites. I would like to also say that for those who talk about the Holy Land, I always say to them, you know, the scriptures, the Christian scriptures or Judeo-Christian scriptures, talk about a land that covers Iraq, Iran, everywhere in the Middle East. I mean, even Nineveh, I visited during the time we were in Iraq. It's part of our scriptures. And so our God is not a tribal God. And I think it's important to say that. The last thing I would like to say is that these Israeli lobby groups have been very effective, and I think we took it for granted. They have lobbied on the African continent. They've taken on many heads of states on the African continent and will need to do more work. They offer assistance, they offer developmental assistance and money, and many have turned around. In South Africa, we assumed all of us were politically conscious. We've just discovered there are churches that support Israel, not only the conservative, evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal, but even the traditional ecumenical. I'm surprised that you find it in the Anglican family, Methodist, Lutherans. And I think it tells us that we actually removed our foot on the pedal. I think we need to work harder to get people understand you can't support an unjust Israeli state. We need justice for all the people of Palestine, Israel. And this is the message that we should share with others. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was just about to ask you to round up, but you've stuck to time. Thank you very, very much. There is a big question there in the chat that I'm going to ask you to look at, but you can answer once all the speakers have made their contributions. The next speaker is Karen. Are you ready, Karen? Please unmute yourself. And if you can just have a minute to also introduce yourself again and the movement that you're part of.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Reverend CHIKANE and Rifat. Rifat, wonderful as usual. And Reverend CHIKANE covers so many points which fit so beautifully with Cry for Hope. My name is Karen Fairfax Chumley. I'm from the UK, so thank you very much for inviting me to South Africa this evening. I've been asked to talk about Cry for Hope and the responses to its launch, and a little bit about how attitudes to Israel are affecting the responses to the cry. First of all, the idea behind Cry for Hope, which I will explain how I fit into this in a moment. Rifat has told a little bit about the last decade since Kairos Palestine was set up, and how Kairos Palestine has lobbied WCC, World Church organizations, and really with no result at all. The Christian church has been slow, quiet, unresponsive to an ever worsening situation for peace and justice in Palestine, Israel. So that it had come to a moment really when what to do next as Christians, what are we to do? And at a Kairos Palestine conference in Bethlehem last December 19, there was also following that a global Kairos for Justice meeting. Now I just explained global Kairos for Justice because that's partly where I come into it. This has arisen out of Kairos Palestine. At the meeting 2 years ago, the Kairos Palestine conference 2 years ago, there were so many organizations globally who were supporting Palestinian rights that it was clear that we needed to have some organization which brought those together to make voices stronger, stronger, easier to be heard. It was also evident that a lot of the organizations supporting Palestine themselves came from oppressed communities. So that's where this concept of global Kairos for Justice, justice globally supported by the Kairos for Palestine doctrine, if you like, which I'll come to in a moment. So that's where that came from. And that gave Kairos Palestine, I think, I don't know whether Rifat agrees, a really a much stronger base. And at the conference last year, I sadly wasn't there, but colleagues were, and they sat down and said, what shall we do now? What can Kairos Palestine, Global Cries for Justice do at this moment, this Kairos moment when things are getting worse and worse? And the idea came up for a cry for hope. The idea was a final cry for hope, but then we decided no, nothing was ever final. There are 4 main committees under Global Cries for Justice. There is a communications, BDS, and campaigns, and a theology committee, which, for my sins, which are therefore great, I co-moderate with Dr. Reverend Munza Isaac, who many of you I'm sure know. And we have members from the US, India, Sri Lanka, South Africa, Europe, Germany, and the UK. And so we sat down and we thought, okay, we will write a cry to really set out a challenge to the Christian church. And the Reverend CHIKANE has really been summing this up so well. You know, what does our Christianity mean? Now, we had a tremendous lead for this from the Kairos Palestine document, which Rifat has mentioned, Moments of Truth, which was the original KP document, in that it's very clear that Palestine theology is based on the logic of love. The logic of love brings together the concept of you need to liberate your oppressor as well as the oppressed. So when we looked at the cry, we took that as our central pillar, the logic of love. What's that going to look like? I often say to people that if this was a card game, then Israel holds all the cards and Palestine holds none. But actually, even as I was writing this down, thinking about how I was going to talk to you about this, I thought this is completely wrong, because actually Palestine holds the trump, and I apologize for using that word, the trump card, which is the logic of love. And if you hold the love card and you can operate the love card, you have unbelievable strength. We have all these expressions that love makes the world go round, everything, love conquers all. So we know this. And also, I'm no theologian, I'm just an ordinary Christian in the pew. And so my Christianity, if you like, is quite simple. So I take as my base for my Christianity love. That's what Christ's message to us was. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. It's love. And then love, if you like, is then that all-powerful thing. If I'm going to love God, I'm going to love my neighbor and love my enemy. What does this look like? Can I therefore oppress my fellow human being, just as the Reverend CHIKANE was saying? What does this mean to me? If it means anything at all, it must mean justice. It must mean equality. So if I could hold that card, which the Palestinians hold through Kairos Palestine, and somehow get other people to see that, that is very, very powerful. So we sat down with Cry for Hope and said, how are we going to issue a challenge which the Christian world is going to actually listen to? Because so far they are not listening. We're praying a bit, we're doing a bit, but there's no shift, particularly amongst leadership, much more grassroots. Leadership shift, very, very difficult. So we thought, well, let's create something which is simple and goes absolutely back to basics. So we said, we have the logic of love. We are going to operate the logic of love. And our catchphrase, if you like, for the cry is, we cannot serve God and the oppression of the Palestinian people, exactly as the Reverend CHIKANE has just said. You have to choose. You can't say I'm a Christian, I'm following Christian belief, I'm following what Jesus taught me, love my neighbor, love my enemy, love God. I'm not doing it. And it's no good going on pretending. You've got to stop. This is the Kairos moment. Stop now, because we are putting ourselves in jeopardy, and we're putting our faith in jeopardy. We're putting our interpretation of the Bible in jeopardy if we don't actually, at this moment, decide that we're going to take a different road on this. So we wrote the Cry for Hope with a two-stage process, if you like. Obviously, we on the committee itself, we come from different denominations across the Christian faith, and we were very aware that we wanted to have a document which all denominations, whether established or disestablished, I could identify with. And I know that there has been criticism that it's still too focused towards the global north. But I just hope that people, if they really look at it carefully and unpick and get back down to the logic of love, that it is a useful document for everybody. It can be used. So the first stage is one of study, reflection, and confession. What's been going on? What's been happening in your church vis-a-vis what's been happening in Palestine, and also obviously our view of anti-Semitism, treatment of the Jews across the centuries. It's such a complicated issue, but Palestine, not just in this century, but before this century, well, last century now. This morning we had our Sabeel Kairos UK Zoom conference. I've been Zooming all day, and Isaac was a speaker, and he came up with the word, rather than confess, of lamentation. And I thought that was a really good way of looking at it, that we study, we reflect, and we lament. Because I come from a church which doesn't have a confessional background, so the lamentation is easier for me to engage with. But that is the idea, that we look at ourselves, we see what's been going on, we see how we've been reacting. And then from that lamentation, from those confessions, those reflections, those studies, we come to decisive action. It's not just action, it's decisive action. This is going to be the whole crux for the Call for Hope, is whether we can convert it, the interest, which I'll come to in a minute, which is great, fantastic, how that converts into decisive action. The call itself gives you 7 options, but obviously they're only options. They include things like initiating processes in your own church, amongst leadership, amongst congregations, to actually, I say, challenge what's going on. Get involved in non-violent actions like BDS, obviously very important one. Engaging in study, looking at theologies which are just promote colonialism and promote inequality, as again the Reverend CHIKANE was saying. So there are those ideas in there. And the bottom line all the time of it is that you can't serve God and the occupation at the same time, the oppression of the Palestinian people at the same time. Once we sorted out our text, which I think came to 17 drafts, Rifat was very involved. He got very fed up with it, I think. We got it out, but we wanted to launch it already endorsed by, we didn't call them important, we said influential Christians and other faiths. So theologians, academics, clergy, lay people. And we started off with a target of 75 and ended up with over 300, which was amazing. And as these endorsements to it came in, it was really encouraging. And there was some which was, we just realized that we were doing something which the church really wanted. It was a timely document, and it seemed to hit for a lot of people the right spot. And I'll just read you 2 actually from Southern Africa, which Marty Momberg mentions in her blog, which I think has been sent to you for this webinar. So I think they're really powerful. This is from Bishop Purity Malinga, who is the presiding bishop of the Methodist Church in Southern Africa. And she says, Christian silence and inaction give support to injustice and contribute to the dehumanization and death of the Palestinians. I cannot then be a follower of Christ and support the oppression of Palestinians or of any other people. Then Bishop Luke Pato, the Anglican Bishop of Namibia, who also represents the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, he writes the endorsements, Palestinians have been held neck down for decades. We cannot allow them to suffocate any further. Silence is complicit with suffocation. And that, of course, is particularly timely because of the Black Lives Matter movement, and shows you that actually Global Cries for Justice does bring in so many different strands, if you like, of oppression and inequality.
Lauren, I'm going to ask you to begin to round up, please, if you don't
Right.
mind.
Okay, that's fine. I'm going to jump. I just want to talk very, very briefly about attitudes, Christian attitudes to Israel. This obviously is an absolutely huge one. And I just had two words, which I was going to give you to begin with: hesitant and confused. Hesitant, particularly church leaders. I'm established church, I'm Church of England. The retired bishops, very happy to sign, bishops in post, whoa, far too frightened. They're frightened about their Jewish Christian interfaith dialogue in particular. What they talk about, I have no idea, but obviously not Palestinian rights and the situation in Israel-Palestine. Amongst lay people, confusion. They don't know enough about what's going on. We are inherently pro-Jewish. It doesn't necessarily make us anti-Palestinian, but we don't know anything about Palestinians, and we have been brought up to be pro-Jewish equals pro-Israel, for obviously historical reasons about this, post-World War, etc. And we also, there's huge confusion, I think, as again, Reverend CHIKANE was saying, between, are we talking about the state of Israel, biblical Israel, Zionism, Israeli policies, and we have huge issues with anti-Semitism. They're very, very clever campaigns so that if we open our mouths to criticize Israeli policies, we may be jumped on as being anti-Semitic. So people are very frightened. They don't know the boundaries of what actually of just criticism of what's going on, as opposed to criticism which becomes anti-Semitic. So I would say all of us need education, education, education. And that in the UK, actually, we decided today at the conference, what we're doing is we've got a letter which our advocacy worker has written, going out to as many people as possible, asking their church leaders or their parish priest or somebody to sign up to some webinars we're going to do to bring in Palestinian theologians, including Rifat, I'm sure, to talk to people, tell people what's going on, educate them so that they can start making decisions for themselves. Thank you very much.
Sorry for doing
That's all right.
this.
That's good. That's great.
Speaker, and the questions are piling up, if you don't mind. So I want to proceed to the last presenter for the session. It's Clint de Bruin. He's part of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. He's a theologian, and this is an issue he's very passionate about, and is one of the people that works with us. We've just set up a little group to deal with this as well. So very welcome to you, Clint. Thank you.
Thank you, Moshe, and thanks, colleagues and comrades. I simply, in this last part of the session, in terms of the panel, just want to highlight three aspects, or speak to three aspects. One is, what is the challenge or the agenda before us as Christians, as churches, in relation to Palestine and Israel? Secondly, I want to say something about solidarity, what it means and what it might not mean. And thirdly, to talk about churches and strategies, particularly strategic modes of engagement that can advance the cause. So first of all, what is the challenge or the agenda before us? As this Solidarity School has made clear, we are interested in strengthening Christian solidarity with Palestinians. In other words, we recognize that there is already the existence of some Christian solidarity with Palestinians, but we need to strengthen it. In fact, people like myself would be quite critical and say there's very little Christian solidarity with Palestinians, and that's why this is precisely the area that we need to focus on, a dimension of the struggle. We need to give attention to the role of churches and Christians as faith communities in terms of Palestine. This agenda of strengthening Christian solidarity with Palestinians happens in a broader context. It happens in a context of Zionism in all its forms, religious and secular, political. It's in a context of capitalism. It's in a context of colonialism. It's in a context of patriarchy. It's in a context of racism, and so on. And I think we also keep those aspects in mind whenever we are talking about strengthening solidarity and what that might mean, especially when we start talking about intersectionality of struggles. This agenda of strengthening Christian solidarity with Palestinians in this context is about ending the occupation. It's about combating Zionism, and it is also about advancing liberation and justice. In other words, one of the things I try to make clear in my own engagement with people is that I'm not really that interested in what's going to happen in 50 years' time if the occupation had to end. I don't want to get caught up in conversations about 2 states or 1 state or whatever kind of solutions. Right now, using Archbishop Desmond Tutu's analogy of the elephant's foot that is on the tail of the mouse, we need to get the elephant's foot off the tail of the mouse. And that's where our energy needs to be. And so even if we're talking about love, if we're talking about faith, if we're talking about hope, that we do it with a sense of urgency, that it is not an empty, clanging sense of love, faith, and hope, but it is one that is going to advance justice. It's going to end injustice, and it's going to work towards a just peace. So that's something in terms of the agenda that I really try to make clear in my own engagement. Secondly, in terms of solidarity, we are saying we want to strengthen solidarity, particularly Christian solidarity with Palestinians. And this is indeed not an easy task. But in terms of solidarity is not always good. The most evil things in our society has taken place through solidarity. The Holocaust that we refer to was possible because of solidarity. Apartheid in South Africa was possible because of solidarity. Slavery was possible because of solidarity. And so it's important for us not to be lazy in our analysis and in our contributions around solidarity, but we need to put on a critical lens and to define the kind of solidarity that we are talking about, and make sure that it is a solidarity that is a responsible solidarity, that it's a liberatory character of solidarity, that it is responsive, that it is accountable, that it advances the good for all and the flourishing of all of life, even beyond human beings. So it's really important just to stress that. Now, very quickly, I want to state that if we want to strengthen Christian solidarity with Palestinians, it cannot take place apart from a few things. And I'm just going to quickly mention 4 things as I watch as I keep my eye on the clock as well. The first thing to say is that there can be no solidarity. When we're talking about solidarity, there can be no solidarity without social consciousness. And there can be no solidarity without social analysis. And there can be no solidarity without social mobilization. And there can be no solidarity without personal sadness. Now, that's quite a loaded few lines I've made there, but let me start in no specific order. First of all, we cannot talk about solidarity if we don't know how to be sad. And here, the Christian community, with its emphasis on spirituality, with its emphasis on reflection, with its emphasis that doesn't just give attention to the mind, but also the heart, has a key role to play. Where we nurture empathetic, not just sympathetic, but also empathetic human beings. And if we are a community that doesn't have a clue how to be sad about the injustices happening around us, if we don't have a clue about empathy, if all we are concerned about is just doctrine and right thinking, and we just want to argue back and forth with each other, using biblical text, but we don't know how to be empathetic and we don't know how to love, there will be no solidarity and there will be no impact. And so, personal sadness, the issue of Palestine should keep us awake at night. And if it's not keeping us awake at night as Christians, we will never be responsive to the injustices in the world. Secondly, no solidarity without social analysis. And this is something that I don't have to talk about. This is something that comes out in the Kairos Palestine document. This is something that Rifat and others have highlighted in terms of what is really going on and why what is going on is going on. If we don't understand, if we don't do the actual analysis, if we don't do the work of studying and reading as people of faith, we will never be able to be in a solidarity relationship in society and advance justice. So part of our role as faith communities is also to nurture this sense of study, of exploring, of analyzing, but not analyzing to paralyze, but analyze to mobilize, analyze to conscientize, and so on. Thirdly, there can be no solidarity without a social consciousness. And yeah, I'm really talking about the conscientization process. And I think all of us who are speaking here have been through a conscientization process where we were not born on the side of Palestinians. A part of our conscientization process, in fact, was that we were socialized to think of the singular narrative of the story of Israel, the state of Israel, of Zionism, of the Holocaust. And that was the only narrative that we were exposed to. And so it's important that that we went through a process of conscientization where where a different social consciousness emerged. Now, this social consciousness, when it comes to Christian Zionism and relating to Christians and churches, we may be tempted to get into doctrinal and biblical arguments back and forth. At the end of the day, what is this message of the gospel? What is this image of God that we find in the Bible? It is a God of love. It is a God of justice. It is a God of liberation. It is a God of responsibility. It is a God of life. And it's a gospel of life. And if we as Christians and faith communities cannot agree on that, then we cannot lay claim, so to speak, to this God of liberation and justice. We are serving a false God. We are in a false faith. And so strategically, what we need to do is to highlight this ethos, this value, this commitment to a God of life, and that we choose life, because what is happening in Palestine, Israel, it's a life and death matter. It is not about simply doctrinal issues. It's existential, real life issues. And this comes out in the Kairos Palestine document, where we read about the harsh realities on the ground. And so the question I want to put before us, especially the Christian communities, is you and I, we need to make a decision about how we are going to relate to Palestinians, because we never grew up with this idea of Palestinians and the existence of Palestinians. In fact, we find it problematic that people will talk about Palestinians. Some of us even get offended when we mention the word Palestine and Palestinians. But we need to make up our minds and stop dodging responsibility for this decision. Our grandchildren are going to judge us on the basis of how we responded to the plight of Palestinians, just as previous generations are judging us for how we responded to the issue of the Holocaust or the issue of apartheid. And we will have to explain, and to the future generations, they will read about this in textbooks about the freedom of Palestine, and they will wonder, how was it possible that churches and faith communities were not clear about where they stood? How come they could say, oh, things are so complicated. It's not as simple as you think. And we will have to give an answer to that. Now, one of the major problems about this, which affects our sense of consciousness in the church in the last 4 minutes that I have, is that we continue to engage with this othering process. We have othered Palestinians. They are different from us. We don't see them as part of us. Most of us in the church, we have not seen, and sorry I have to use language like this, but we have not seen a Palestinian. We have not talked to a Palestinian. We have not enjoyed a relationship with Palestinians. Most of us believe the lie that Palestinians do not exist. Most of us reduce their humanity to that of terrorists and suicide bombers. Most of us think Palestinians are merely Muslims. Therefore, it's got nothing to do with us as Christians. Most of us don't know that there are Palestinian Christians. Most of us don't realize that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew born in Bethlehem in occupied Palestine today, that the church was born in Palestine, that the Bible is the church's first Kairos document from Palestine. Now, historically, there tends to be three ways we relate to the other, because we typically see ourselves as very settled creatures concerned with our own parochial concerns. One way, which has been picked up by a Polish historian, is that we declare war on the other. A second response in how we relate to the other is we isolate ourselves. And the third response he talks about is that we show hospitality. And I think we have seen this in the history of Christianity around different issues, where we declare war on certain people or groups of people, like women, slaves, the LGBTQIA community, Palestinians as well. We declare war. If it gets a little bit better than that, we engage in isolationism, where we isolate ourselves from Palestinians and from these issues, where we think it's got nothing to do with our issues at home. And so we abdicate ourselves from a responsibility. Yes, yeah.
2 minutes, please.
2 minutes, okay.
Oh, thanks.
And thirdly, we have the option of hospitality, which this Polish historian is trying to say hospitality is about recognition, and it's essentially about solidarity, where we struggle with and we walk with and we journey with. And so this talks to the history of Christianity, particularly in this past 100 years of how we have related to Palestinians. We've declared war, or we've isolated ourselves, or we are in solidarity with them. And what I want to say is to our churches, and particularly to our church leaders, we need to make a decision. Let's come clean. Let's come out of the closet and declare our interests. Are we at war with Palestinians? Are we isolating ourselves from Palestinians where we find our very brothers and sisters in Palestine? Or are we in solidarity and willing to journey with them? That's why the social consciousness is needed, but it's dependent on proximity. It's dependent on how we relate to Palestinians. If there is time in the Q&A discussion time, I will pick up on the last part of what I wanted to say, which is about then strategic modes of engagement through the churches in terms of strengthening this solidarity with Palestinians. If we opt against isolationism, if we opt against war and conflict, but we seek justice and life in all its fullness with Palestinians side by side with them, how then do we act? What are those potential modes of engagement that we can explore? Thanks, Mersha.
So thank you, Clint. Thanks to all the presenters. I just want to tell you and the Zoom participants that I'm told by the technical team that there are about 1,000 people following the conversation on live stream. So that's really, really fantastic. It's an important, you can see the involvement of people in this topic. There are lots of questions, but before I'm going to open the floor, I'm going to call on Ronnie. Comrade Ronnie, can you show us your face? And I'm going to put you on the spot because all four the presenters spoke a lot about the role of Christianity, the importance of the Christian faith, how we should act, how we should be in relation to Palestine. But there's also some other important arguments, I think, that we should add to this debate. And the point that Clint makes and all of you make about the lack of knowledge or the way in which the Bible is being used to forward and to advance Christian Zionist arguments, etc., I think should be challenged also in a very materialist way around the history of the region, etc., so that we really also challenge both Christian Zionism and Zionism as it exists today. So I'm going to call on Ronnie to make a few comments. He wrote this article, which was, I think, quite a fantastic title, which says The Chief Justice, the Bible, and Palestinian Real Estate. And I think this issue of the way he dealt with the issue is another dimension that I think we should add to our arguments. Ronnie, are you there?
Can you see my face, Mercia? Because I think I'm there.
So I know I'm calling on you out of the blue, but I'm going to ask you to give us a few minutes to just put forward, to add to the arguments. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. I found it absolutely riveting, the input. And I'd like to say I was in a Zoom discussion just a few hours ago, organized by the Muslim Judicial Council of Cape Town. It was very interesting indeed. However, in answer to the presentations made, the focus was on how to bring in the Muslim believers, the Muslim community of Cape Town, of South Africa, and internationally. And one went as far as saying that was the primary requirement, to focus on the Muslim communities of the Middle East, etc. Of course, it's very important. And it's extremely important to bring in the Christian people. It's a majority in our country and across the world, in America and these places. It's so important to face up to Trump and these crazy evangelical peoples of the Deep South, etc. Clint said he was going to come on to broaden this, I think he was indicating, to deal with the issue of solidarity outside of the Christian fold. And I absolutely accept, if we're talking with the Muslim community, if we're dealing with the Christian community or Judaic or the Hindu or whatever, that's the starting point. And we can see the enormous debate taking place within the Christian community worldwide. But in answer to you, Clint, and the others, Joe Slovo, leader of the Communist Party, became involved in the Defiance campaign of the 50s. Frank CHIKANE knows it so well, Mercia and others do. And they found common cause, the communist and the Christian, outstanding Christian called Trevor Huddleston. Huddleston says to Slovo, for a communist, Joe, you'd make a good Christian. Quick as a flash, Karen. Slovo says, but Reverend Trevor, for a Christian, you'd make a good communist. The issue, I believe, to take it further, is in relation to what Mercia has said. We know how within all of the faiths, it's so like the number of angels dancing on the head of the pin or the needle. And they'll come with their various versions, and we've got to put up the Kairos fight for sure. But in terms of the unity, the question of internationalism, Clint, and I'm not so sure I go along with the way you handled that. We're talking about solidarity for justice, which is solidarity of all peoples, of all faiths, and of the non-believers, the secularists, with throughout the world. And what we must do is focus in on what Mercy has referred to as the material conditions. I don't want to say that you must be Marxists, but we've got to look into the fundamental problem. And out of that fundamental problem, to advocate. And we saw the 1886 Berlin Conference, the Scramble for Africa. We've never heard the term the Scramble for Arabia, but it came about post the First World War. Britain and France, Balfour, Sykes-Picot, what was it all about? What is the issue today? It isn't Muslim versus Jew, Christian versus this and that. It's about interests, material interests. It's about resources. It's about seeing the Palestinian people, and I don't use the term Israel-Palestine, and nobody who believes in the Holy Land should. It's Palestine. That was robbed courtesy of Balfour and Sykes-Picot and the division of the scrambles for Arabia, so that the West and now the USA can absolutely rape the land and push the Palestinian people aside and reach out and gobble up the resources from oil and gas right through to the Pacific. And this is the world we're living in. And that's what must unite us with the Palestinians, because they are at the absolute eye of the storm. And that's justice and the struggle for justice and what internationalism is all about for all of us. So yes, wonderful discussions, but moving out of this, moving out of the discussion I had earlier in terms of the Muslim, basically discussion, etc., and sometimes with the Jewish community, etc., which is very, very difficult. But the thing is to hold out what this is all about, and it's about land, and it's about essentially the fact that Palestine was colonized courtesy of the West, and the annexation and the sellout and the treachery of the Emirates and Bahrain and the Saudis is all about the struggle in terms of their interests and the struggle for those resources. And that's what, from Black Lives Matter to Palestinian Lives Matter, and the South African aspect of this, Africa, Global South, Europe, Australia, Americas, this is what we've got to bring together. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I want to see if there are hands for questions, because there are lots of questions in the chat as well, and I'll give each of the speakers an opportunity to answer, to round off, but I just want to open the floor for comment and addition. Can I see anybody? Anybody? All right. Shall I start? I don't know. I'm checking before I give. I thought it would be useful to see if there were others. I can, yeah. Amanda, you could pose your question or comment. Elsa, you can do the same. Dinga, you can all have an opportunity, and then we can round off with the panel. Anybody wants to kickstart?
Yeah, this is Elsa. I also wanted to hear a little bit maybe from Ronnie. You know, you talked about the material basis for the Zionist push, and hear a little bit too about the notion of white supremacy. And for example, within the United States, Christian Zionists are very, very much aligned with a racist agenda and with a white supremacist agenda. And I wanted to hear your comments about that in relationship to Palestine as well.
Thank you, Elsa. Anyone else, please? Dinga?
Hi. Thank you, Meshia. I've put my questions on the chat box. My name is Dinga. I grew up in a Christian family. My father was a priest, and I grew up in the church. Currently, I'm involved in a trade union in South Africa called the Metal Workers Union, NUMSA. And what I've found in my experience in doing a Palestinian solidarity work within the trade unions is how the sort of Christian background and teachings that's many of our members possess, how that is a stumbling block to an appreciation of the Palestinian cause. So I do appreciate, Comrade Ronnie, your focus on material needs as a basis for solidarity. But in the work that I've done or we've done in the union, this question of the Christian background, the sort of presentation of biblical Israel, the promised land, is a major stumbling block, which I think is bigger than the stumbling block that people maybe faced when they were asked to give solidarity to us as South Africans, because there's an intersection between faith of the people we're asking to come in and give solidarity, their faith and their desire as union people to act in a just way. And I think that the Palestinian solidarity movement, this quandary of how we deal with this has not been done, which is why I've posed some of the two questions that I've put forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to liven up the voices here. Amanda, are you still with us? Please feel free to comment. Make your comment to the group, Amanda. Adams. Anyone else? Okay, perhaps we should give each one an opportunity to respond to the issues, and then we can see if there are more people wanting to comment or come into the conversation. Is that you, Stan? Yes.
Yes,
Go ahead.
please.
Go
Thank you
ahead.
very much. I would just like also to get, make an opinion here or a comment, and ask the panelists also to respond to that. And this is that quite often when we talk about Christian support for Palestine, and this came out in what Dinga said and others as well, that formulated doctrinal or ideological positions of Christian Zionism, as it is also, for instance, in the US, Canada, or the global North, Europe, etc., it organized in organizations and money and all of that, which is very powerful in those areas, and they do have an impact on churches and others that they support in what we call sort of the global South. However, that influence is something we have to deal with. What we also have to deal with are churches, ecumenical structures, World Council of Churches, others, etc., who are actually doing nothing about this situation in effect. And I think Clint has made sort of some reference to that, who are perhaps even critical in statements, but it doesn't go actually anywhere beyond that. People who are, they know about things that are happening there, and still in South Africa, church leaders, churches that have visited Palestine, you don't see any movement on that. And for me, it is not just a matter of politics. It becomes also a foundational issue in the faith that we have to address on the same level as the difficulties that Christians have with Christian Zionism in terms of doctrines and use of the Bible, because that is by implication for Christians a indictment of faith on this in terms of being practical and concrete and decisive, as the cry for hope, which Karen has been speaking to about as well. In other words, it is not just the doctrinal stated policies and Bible texts, but also what is happening in practice out of fear, out of confusion, or whatever. That becomes a matter that Christians will have to deal with, and that is probably also part of the difficulty that that Dinga and others have been talking about. I would love to hear some things, and that I think it's a strategic challenge also for whoever deals with Palestine solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stian. I'm going to ask Aslam. He's also posed a question. I'm just calling on you to make your contributions. Aslam, are you with us? Do you want to go ahead? Aslam. We may have lost Aslam. All right, I think what I'm going to do is to ask each of the presenters to respond to the questions, and then I'm going to ask Roshan, and I'm going to ask Salim to round off the session with some comments about the next school and also some of the activities of the South African BDS Coalition, and to persuade all of you to join. Those of you who have not joined, please join. We really want to strengthen our movement. Aslam is connecting and he can't. There's a problem. We'll give him a chance if he gets on track. Frank, you seem to be ready. Do you want to kickstart?
Yeah, no, I'm ready. I'm ready. I had gone through the chat groups and the questions that have been asked, and I would like to just rush through them quickly. There's a question about, has the Pope taken a stand on Palestine? And I just want to put it more as Catholic. My information is that yes, they've taken a stance on Palestine. I think it's a question of what action. Now, for the Catholics, of course, they act as church, but they also have diplomatic representatives. And so they operate differently. We have interacted with the Catholic Church in South Africa. And we have communicated with both the World Council of Churches and the Vatican, and suggested things we could do together. And I would like to leave it at that because it is in the process. On the comment relating to the WCC and other institutions, I just want to say that, I've created lots of enemies within the WCC. The point is, the WCC can only move insofar as the slowest moving churches allow, especially those who resource it in particular. And I've sensed that when you push harder, then they go and say, the General Secretary might be willing to do things, but he must do what the churches agree to do. And when you go for an agreement, you get the minimum requirement, you go to the agreement, which is a minimum requirement rather than what you should be doing generally. And I think that's a major, major challenge. there were questions about the issue of evangelical support. I just want to say in South Africa, the division is blurred because TISA, which is the Evangelical Association of South Africa, takes a very radical position on this matter. But there are evangelicals outside who are in all sorts of other churches. Then there is the charismatics and the Pentecostals and etc. We have a lot of work to do. But there's one person who asked about the Zionist churches. You see, there's a confusion in South Africa that there are some of the African independent churches call themselves Zionist churches. And because of that, they then get confused with Christian Zionism. And people have not done enough work to make a differentiation so that we can work with those churches. Some of them are in the SACC, and we've engaged each other. And when they understand what you are talking about, they take a position. And so it's a matter of understanding, in my view. And then, of course, there is this narrative of the Old Testament. And you know, our comrade Ronnie called it pre-Moses. I would want to say it goes to post-Moses, because most of this devastation happened after Moses. And so I have got to understand, and this is my concluding remark, I've come to understand that our Palestinian brothers and sisters, theologians, have developed a better theological understanding of this Old Testament biblical narrative. And they've written about it, they've reflected on it. It's only when you engage with them that you learn. I've learned a lot from my Palestinian friends because we reflected on South Africa. The Afrikaners called themselves a chosen nation. It was easy to dismiss that theory. But then they were using the Israeli biblical language. And now you are dealing with the real language not used by the Afrikaners. And I think it's something that the Palestinians should help us. And I would like to say, I don't remember, I think it's Clint who talked about some have not seen a Palestinian. And I found it effective when we have Palestinian brothers and sisters coming to South Africa and standing before a conference of Christians and saying, I'm a Christian. And people get surprised. They don't expect it because they don't know. And I think if they come and say there's apartheid in Israel, here is the story. There's an apartheid in Palestine. Here is the story. People get to change faster than hearing it from friend CHIKANE. And we did the same during the apartheid days. We had to go to those countries, speak to people. And I think we need to do that as well, as much as we can, interact to mobilize people. Thank you.
Thanks. Please go ahead.
Can I say something?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, although there are no questions posed to me, but I would like to say some comments. I mean, let me start by talking a bit about Christian Zionism. I mean, the statistics, suggest something really horrible in the United States. The statistics suggest that at least 1 in 4 American Christians surveyed recently by Christianity Today said they believe it is their biblical responsibility to support the nation of Israel. And here I feel that this is really serious, but we should not, neglect the mainstream churches theology. Because sometimes I feel that we make it simple to criticize evangelicals and Christian Zionists as if there is no problem within the mainstream church's theology, which is not. Because if you go deep and you really study the kind of theology they have, you will discover immediately that Palestinians and Palestinians' oppression are not there. And their teachings based on biblical Israel, equating it with modern Israel. But when it comes to, to speak about this, immediately they will shift the discussion to speak about Christian Zionism as if the problem is only there. No, I feel that the problem is also within the mainstream churches and also the mainstream ecumenical institutions. Stian mentioned about the lack of proper response from the World Council of Churches. And I will say there is also, weak response from other ecumenical institutions. Because when it comes to Israel, everyone becomes coward. Because it's easy to be attacked. It is easy to call them anti-Semitic, and immediately they will dismiss their discussions and their speech. So all the time when it comes to Israel, they are so afraid, and that's why we cannot see that there is really strong response coming from the churches, and not just in words, because we need also actions. It's not just words. Most of the time what frustrates us, and I would like Reverend CHIKANE to know this, when, for instance, World Council of Churches, they say, look, we only listen to the churches in Palestine. Yeah? This is how they responded to our cry for hope, basically. Okay, I respect this. But they know for sure, and they know definitely, that the heads of churches in Jerusalem, they are also under pressure from Israel. They are unable to say their mind. They are captured. They are hijacked. Their decisions is hijacked. So when the World Council of Churches, instead of leading the march, they hid themselves behind captured heads of churches. And here I am not attacking them. On the contrary, I feel pity for them because I know the pressure they are living under. So this is just to make an excuse, not to say your mind, not to say truth to power, as this. Sometimes I feel that this is an empty slogan. Yeah, we just use it because it's nice to talk about it. And my last point about this, that it is very also frustrating to see that the position of some churches, mainly in Europe, this position is on the right side of their own governments. If you look and see some churches, and I don't want to enter into a problem mentioning Germany or in the Netherlands, although I mentioned that, you find out that the position of their governments is much more progressive than the position of the churches. Yeah. Very weird, and cannot be understood. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Karen, and then Clint, you will be last. Karen, if you have a comment. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, just to sort of really just to build on things that Rifat and Rev CHIKANE was saying, I just sometimes wonder what God people are worshipping. It is quite remarkable when we say that we have Jesus Christ, the God of love, and we seem to be so far from that. The Reverend CHIKANE talked about the importance of Palestinian theological understanding, and I find this incredibly important and actually easily the most useful tool in understanding. And I very much like the hermeneutic put forward by the Reverend Naim Atik, which is the hermeneutic of love. So you look at what is happening in the Bible and ask yourself the question, could this be done? Could this be put forward? Is this something which belongs with a God of love? And I think that's really useful and very simple. And I always say to people that I don't think that really God was in the business of real estate. I leave it at that.
Very much. Clint, and then I'll give Ronnie a minute and we'll start to round off. Thanks, Clint. It's your turn.
Thanks, Comrade Moshe. Just a few things. I try to speak very quickly, thinking I can get more in, but the time still runs out. The first thing is to say this BDS school has had that happens today. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Has this focus on Christianity, Palestine, and solidarity. We don't typically have this type of conversation, and therefore, just in response to Comrade Ronnie, just to say, I and I think others have also been quite intentional, very deliberate about focusing on the church, on Christians. We'd be the first people to say there are these material dimensions of the struggle of the world. But for today's purpose, how do we engage with believers, with faith communities who are not using this political language? Otherwise, we are just speaking, we are just preaching to the choir. So how do we engage? And we can talk to them using all kinds of big words, but how do we talk the language that people can understand? We also need to focus on Christians in particular because of Christian Zionism that is so strong. You know, there's a book that that self-help book that we all know about that says when bad things happen to good people. And then sometime later, there was an interesting book that came out which said when bad Christians happen to good people. And for me, that kind of sums up also what is going on in terms of Christians and Palestinians, that we can be bad Christians amongst good people. And therefore, we must give attention to this specifically. Secondly, I think one of the discussions we need to have in the school and beyond this school is also about being self-critical. I think that's one of the key traditions of the Kairos theological tradition, was our ability and capacity to look within ourselves internally and be critical about how we are doing what we are doing. Because we may be preaching the right message, but how we are doing what we are doing becomes impediments to others. And from my experience in the past 9-10 years as an activist around the issue of Palestine, I've seen a number of things that I think we are doing that is not welcoming to the faith communities. I think we are not helping to debunk myths. When people think of course, when they think about the solidarity movement, they have various stereotypes. I don't think we are doing enough to debunk those myths and to break those stereotypes. I think we feed into those stereotypes many times, and no wonder we don't get support from Christians. You know, I mean, one of the practical examples I just give, it might seem very insignificant, but being part of various solidarity groups, I cannot fathom the idea how we can plan protests and marches on a Sunday morning, and then we want to whine that we don't have support from the churches. So I think in a very pragmatic sense, this sensitivity and hospitality and invitational type of ethic needs to become stronger in terms of our activist praxis. Otherwise, we have no reason to complain that we are not strengthening solidarity with Palestinians from faith communities, particularly the Christian community. And then lastly, just to say that I don't think people change their minds around the issue of Palestine and the issue of Israel. I don't think they change their minds because of polemical debates or because understanding material conditions or political jargon. I think there are other factors that play a role in why people change their mind in terms of solidarity with Palestinians, and that's something we've got to explore, because otherwise we are being very busy doing things that might not make an impact at the end of the day. So what is it that causes people to change their minds? How did I, as someone who wasn't pro-Israel or anything like that, But I was never one of those people who thought that God's, you know, God is this exclusive God, and the Bible, you know, there's a special plan for some people based on race and so on. But the one thing I can tell you is that what changed my mind had nothing to do with polemics or politics. There are other factors. And in my conversations with other activists and role players, we need to actually listen and learn about what is it that causes people to change their minds in terms of joining the solidarity movement with Palestinians.
Thank you. Ronnie, you have a last word, then I'll round off. I think we've been challenged in many different ways. And I'm hoping that the presenters have also been challenged, because you often are in the church and have a role to play and how to help us to understand some of these things. This is, I think, a critical dialogue so that we strengthen our interventions and we listen better and we act more together, etc. But Ronnie, you have a word and then we can round off. I still have Roshan and I have Salim at the end because we've got to make some announcements. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. There were two questions that came my way. One from Elsa and the other from Dinga. So I'm going to join those in my response. Elsa asked me about the question of the evangelical Christians and white supremacy arising out of the United States. Just to say on that, and this is where we need to ground in the reality, go and read Theodor Herzl from the beginning. And he said, we will find, he says to his followers, we will find a co-joining with the anti-Semites because they want us out of Europe. They don't like us. After all, anti-Semitism is natural. That's his view. And we'll go to Palestine, where we will build an iron wall against Asian barbarism. Where he's talking about Arabs right through to the Pacific. And Churchill says what's good for the Jews will be good for the British Empire. So that whole approach, you will find, runs right through Zionism. Ben-Gurion, right through Sharon to Netanyahu. And they come together with anti-Semitism for the interests, relations of power on the ground. And that's what they have in common. And that's where there's the unity. And then they use the Bible because in terms of their fundamentalistic interpretation, when all the Jews are in the Holy Land, that will be the coming of the Messiah, the second coming. I mean, that's what the appeal is. And of course, people like Netanyahu play along with it. They're laughing all the way to the bank. They found their salvation through that. And the question from Comrade Dinga, and it relates to Clint's response to me. I'm not talking, Mercia, you don't talk about us going to the people with Marxist doctrines and slogans. I recall when the ban was lifted on the ANC and I emerged from the underground, I was going around the country saying, Madiba and Jane David, who slew Goliath. I don't know if I'd use this today because of the way people then think. You're talking about Israel as David and the Palestinians Goliath. It's the other way around. But it's in terms of the consciousness, yes. Comrade Dinga is absolutely correct. We understand the call. Martin Luther King Jr., let my people go. The Bible is powerful with those metaphors, and it's for all of us, not just the Christian comrades here, it's for all of us to be able to explain why Jerusalem, this wonderful gospel song, is a song which is essentially for the Palestinians, not for the Zionists. So it's consciousness that we are struggling against. I accept that. I'm not a Marxist determinist, but we've got to explain the facts to people, and that's about power relations, where power resides, what are the interests of people, and out of those interests, I say to Stian, who left out the word totally, when he said it's fear and the other things that then appeal to people, cowardice, etc. What's appealing to, yes, the church elders as it appeals to everybody else is that hegemony, who's running society, the mainstream media, and nobody there can say that the church in its spiritualism is unaffected. And that's what we have to fight against, whether we're Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, and so on.
Thank you. I think I'm going to ask Roshan and then Salim each a minute. This has been I want to say thank you to the panelists. It's been really great. I think we should continue. We should have session 2, Salim, so that we deepen the debate and we begin to explore what our strategies are. Because today we haven't sufficiently had time to talk about strategies. So it's Roshan, please. Over to you.
Thanks, Comrade Mercier, Frank, Karen, Clint, and Rufat. I think it's been a really interesting and engaging session, and it's good to hear different points of view. As a Jewish Muslim communist, I know little about the details of Christianity and how this notion has become so popular amongst so many churches. But I think, you know, taking up Ronnie's point in a way, what we have to do in strategizing around this is to recognize, as Dingo said, it's a really urgent problem, not just in South Africa, but also in the rest of our continent. And the problem is that it's being used as a way in which to gain political support from countries, particularly in Africa. It's a strategy of Israel to use the churches, and I say that not knowing which exactly churches or what, but using that to persuade people that Israel should be supported and the Palestinian cause shouldn't. So I think we're going to have a follow-up strategy session to see how we can take this forward. And it's probably different things. One would be the theological arguments and the how it's presented by Christian solidarity activists to the Christian community. The other is to look at how we present Israel as a colonial state and the fact that colonialism in Africa followed a similar path of the Bible followed by bullets. So I think there are a number of ways in which we need to look at how we strategize to take the message. And I think that's come out in the discussion to different constituencies. But it is very urgent in South Africa and in Africa. And that leads on to, well, we've got at least 3 more sessions of the school planned on different topics. The next one is going to be towards the end of October on the UN, and that's particularly because at this moment the UN General Assembly has started its session and the Human Rights Council session has started, and led by the Palestinian civil society organizations who put out a call to the Global South. We're trying to lobby, particularly South Africa. They want South Africa to lead on this issue, to call, as has been mentioned, not only for sanctions and an arms embargo, but for reinstating the Special Committee Against Apartheid that was set up as a means of solidarity, international solidarity through the United Nations in our struggle. And I think these things are connected, because if we start to present the situation of the Palestinians as one of a colonized people and Israel as the colonial power, doing pretty much similar things to what happened with us under colonialism and apartheid. And we want to make it clear that Israel is an apartheid state. So the next session will be on those issues and to try to understand how, not to technical issues of the UN and getting caught up in all of that, but with the Palestinian civil society organizations, the majority of whom are saying, South Africa, you must take a lead on this. We're going to look at how we can do that, how we can pressure our government. Then we're going to have a session on the political economy, which I think, again, it relates to a lot of the issues raised here, Palestine and the political economy of the struggle. And then lastly on academic and cultural boycott. And I think that's one thing that we need to put into all our solidarity work: boycott, sanctions, and disinvestment. We can't escape it. We have to isolate Israel. Thank you.
Thanks. Salim, the last word. We've run over by 7 minutes, so please, people, give us 1 more minute of your time. Thanks. Salim?
Thank you very much, Mersha. I'm sorry I can't show my video for some reason. Maybe Laura or Roshan could assist. But thank you very much for chairing this. This was a very important session for us. I think the speakers were exceptional. There's many more issues to talk about. And that's why we thought that in December, we might want to have a follow-up, Mersha, as you suggested. But more importantly, we want to discuss with Reverend CHIKANE, with Clint, with others in our sessions in the interim committee of the SA BDS coalition to take this forward. I think many of us feel there's a lot more we can learn. And, you know, for us who have been activists for decades, we've known of Rifat Kassis, we've known of George Habash, who might not be Christian, but he came from a Christian community, of Archbishop Atala Hana. And these are people who have inspired us in the same way: liberation theology, contextual theology. Many of us who grew up, Mersha, in the Black consciousness movement and the role theology played. Many of us as educators have been influenced by Paulo Freire. And this particular school takes its leaf from praxis, from theory and action. So for us as the BDS coalition, our campaigns, our action must be informed. And it's people like Stian, it's people like Clint, it's people like Reverend CHIKANE, it's people like Rifat Kassis, like Comrade Casseroles, that will assist us in both theory and their experience in struggle. And that is the zeitgeist of the BDS coalition. And we have a number of plans. We believe that we need everyone to discuss this in the same way that Moss from the evangelical group in South Africa, together with Naim Jina, together with Heidi Groenebaum and Stian, went to Palestine and made this brilliant movie, The Village Under the Forest. And in South Africa, we have divisions, and it's actually the Palestinian struggle that allows us to come to terms with our divisions. And the kind of solidarity that Ronnie talked about, and the kind of love that Karen mentioned, is the same love as Che Guevara, as you know, Mersha mentioned. Yes. And I think that it is in that spirit that we invite everyone, the hundreds of people who have listened to the speakers, to join us in our other sessions that Roshan talked about, and build this movement and do what Rifat and many others have mentioned, the responsibility of South Africans who've experienced apartheid to support the Palestinian struggle. Thanks, Mersha, for your patience.
Thank you, Salim. Thank you, everyone. I see your hand, Ronnie. Is that an old hand, or do you have 1 second?
It's a very, very old hand.
Okay, good. Then I can say it's been, I think we wanted to introduce the school. We want you to, I think Salim and Rosh has said what we're going to do in the next period. All I can do at this moment is to say thank you to everyone, and to especially the presenters today, and for opening up this debate and getting us to think through how we tackle this very critical question. Thank you everyone. We've run 15 minutes over time, but thanks very much. Good night everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Thanks.